Wife said, "I'm not your property." I stepped back entirely. Then she discovered what happens when independence becomes isolation. It started on what seemed like an ordinary evening. We had just finished dinner, and the usual discussions about household matters transitioned into something sharper, more charged. She looked at me, exasperated, as I asked her about a bill that needed paying, a routine question. Her response was anything but routine. With a tone that cut through the air, she said, "I'm not your property." Her words hung in the room like a storm cloud. At first I didn't know how to react. Was it an accusation, a statement of defiance, a declaration of independence? The way she said it, her tone, the look in her eyes, felt like she was drawing a line in the sand, challenging the very foundation of what I believed our relationship was built on. I didn't say anything. What could I say? I just nodded. But inside something shifted. It wasn't anger, not at first, it was something colder, something resolute. Her words echoed in my mind as I cleared the table in silence. I thought about how much I had sacrificed over the years, working long hours, handling problems, and constantly making sure everything in her life ran smoothly. And now I was hearing that none of it mattered because to her, I was apparently treating her like property. That night, I lay awake replaying the conversation. Was she right? Had I been controlling? Had I reduced her role in our relationship to something transactional? Or was this her way of shirking the responsibilities we both agreed to when we got married? It was impossible to tell what she truly meant. But one thing was clear. She didn't see herself as accountable to me in the way I had always seen myself as accountable to her. As I stared at the ceiling in the dark, a quiet resolve grew within me. Fine, I thought. If she didn't want to be my property, I wouldn't treat her as such. But that also meant, she couldn't expect me to shoulder the burden of being responsible for her. It wasn't about revenge, it was about fairness. If she wanted independence, I'd give it to her completely. The next morning, she acted like nothing had happened, but I was already different. The mental shift I'd made was absolute. I decided to keep my actions subtle, at least at first, no grand announcements, no confrontations. Instead, I'd let the situation speak for itself. When she asked if I'd pay a bill that week, I told her calmly, "You can handle it." She gave me a confused look but didn't say much. It was a small thing, but to me it was symbolic. I wasn't going to be her caretaker anymore. I wasn't going to manage her life while she dismissed my role as something oppressive or insignificant. Throughout the day, I noticed other opportunities to let her take the reins. When the faucet in the kitchen started leaking, I didn't grab my toolbox. When her car needed gas, I didn't take it to the station like I usually would. Each time she seemed puzzled, maybe even annoyed, but she didn't push back, not yet. The declaration she had made the night before was still fresh in my mind, fueling my determination. I wasn't angry, I was focused. This wasn't about punishment, it was about balance. If she didn't want to be treated like she belonged to me, then she couldn't expect the privileges that came with that kind of relationship. I wouldn't interfere in her life, but I also wouldn't prop it up. By the end of the day, I could sense a slight tension in the air. She noticed that something was off, but hadn't connected the dots yet, and I wasn't about to explain it to her. If she wanted independence, she'd have to own it, every single part of it. That evening as I lay in bed once again, I felt an odd sense of clarity. This wasn't a game or a temporary phase, this was a shift in how I saw our relationship, and how I would handle it going forward. Whatever came next, I was ready to let her see exactly what life without my ownership truly looked like. The next morning, I woke up early as usual, but this time I didn't feel the familiar sense of obligation pulling me out of bed. I stayed there for a few extra minutes, listening to the sounds of her morning routine, starting down the hall. Normally, I'd be the one making coffee, but today I stayed put and let her take care of it. When I finally got up, I found her in the kitchen standing near the coffee maker, with a mug in hand. The car keys were next to her, and I could tell she was expecting me to mention her oil change, something she'd been reminding me about all week. But I didn't. I poured myself some coffee and sat down scrolling through my phone, as if it were just another day. "You're going to take the car in today, right?" she asked after a few minutes of silence. I didn't look up. "No, you can handle that." She froze, her mug halfway to her lips. "What do you mean? You always take care of that." I shrugged. "Not this time, it's your car." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't say anything more. She left the house with a brisk clip goodbye, and I could hear the faint slam of the car door as she drove off. That was the first small crack in our routine, but it didn't end there. Throughout the day, I went about my business with deliberate detachment. She called me during her lunch break to remind me about an insurance payment. Something I'd always handled without fail. "Hey, don't forget, the car insurance is due tomorrow," she said casually. I didn't hesitate. "You can pay it. The account details are in the folder." There was a pause, just long enough for me to sense confusion on the other end. "Why are you acting like this?" she finally asked. I kept my tone calm. "I'm not acting like anything, I'm just letting you handle things. You're perfectly capable of doing so." The line went quiet again before she let out a short disbelieving laugh. "Okay fine, whatever." When she came home that evening, the tension was palpable. I deliberately left a couple of things undone, like not taking out the trash, something I'd usually do without fail. I could see her glance at the overflowing bin, as she walked into the kitchen. She didn't say anything, but her frustration was written all over her face. Dinner was another quiet affair. She was waiting for me to say something to explain myself, but I didn't. I cooked for myself, left the dishes in the sink, and went back to my own tasks without offering to do anything for her. It wasn't spite. It was a quiet demonstration of what life looked like without the responsibilities she'd come to expect me to shoulder. That night she finally broke the silence. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Her voice sharp. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. "You said you're not my property." Her expression hardened. "Yeah, I said that." "Well," I replied evenly, "if you're not my property then you're not my responsibility either." Her mouth opened as if she were about to argue, but no words came out. She stood there for a moment staring at me before turning and walking out of the room. I heard the bedroom door close with a sharp click. Now comment update to tag you on part 2.